Someone disrespects you, okay? Maybe it's a colleague who talks over you in a meeting, a friend who dismisses your ideas in front of others, a rival who publicly undermines your work. Or maybe it's something smaller, someone who just doesn't take you seriously, and they don't even bother to hide it. What do? Most people fall into one of two traps. They explode, they react immediately, say something they regret, and in doing so, hand their power over, or they go silent. They swallow it, force a smile, let that humiliation sit in their chest like a stone, slowly poisoning everything around it. But powerful people do neither. And the man who understood this better than almost anyone who ever lived wasn't a king, wasn't a general, wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He was a diplomat's son from Florence, who spent his life watching powerful men rise and fall, studying them the way a surgeon studies the human body. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli. Hey, and over 500 years ago, he cracked the code on something most people still haven't figured out today. How to respond to disrespect in a way that doesn't just protect your dignity, but actually increases your power. If that's something you want to understand, you're in the right place. And if you're new here, this channel is where we break down the psychology of power, influence, and human nature using the greatest minds in history. Hit subscribe and drop a like on this video. It genuinely helps more people find this content. I think what we're about to get into is some of the most practically useful stuff I've ever covered. So, let's get into it. Machiavelli was writing at a time when disrespect wasn't just uncomfortable, it could get you killed. Renaissance Italy was a brutal political arena. Princes betrayed each other over dinner. Alliances collapsed overnight. A man who showed weakness once could find himself exiled, imprisoned, or worse. So when Machiavelli wrote about power, he wasn't theorizing from an armchair. He was writing survival instructions. The first thing he observed, the thing that separates people who hold power from people who lose it, is this: powerful people never react, they respond, okay? And those are two completely different things. Reaction is emotional, it's immediate, belongs to the moment. When you react to disrespect, you're essentially telling the world that this person has control over your emotional state. You're proving that they got to you, okay? The moment someone knows they can get to you, they own a piece of you. Machiavelli saw this play out constantly with the rulers he advised and observed. The prince who could be provoked was the prince who could be manipulated. His enemies would insult him, not because they wanted to fight, but because they wanted to see what he did. They were testing him, looking for the button, and the moment he flinched, they had found it. The response, on the other hand, is calculated. It's patient. It comes from a place of control rather than emotion. Machiavelli's most famous work, The Prince, is essentially a manual on how to respond to threats, to betrayal, to challenges to your authority, okay? And embedded in that work is a framework for handling disrespect that, once you understand it, you will see everywhere. The first principle is what I'd call the Law of Composure. Machiavelli believed that a ruler's most visible asset was not his army or his wealth, it was his bearing. It's the way he carried himself under pressure. Because people are always watching. It's not just your enemies, your allies, your subordinates, the people who are on the fence about you. They are all running a constant calculation in their heads. Is this person solid? Can they be rattled? Is their confidence real or performed? When someone disrespects you and you immediately react, your voice gets sharp, your face flushes, you get defensive. You answer that question for them and you answer it badly. But when someone disrespects you and you remain completely composed, when your voice stays level, your posture doesn't change, okay? And you respond with measured calm, something interesting happens. The disrespect backfires. The person who threw the insult suddenly looks small because they were trying to destabilize you and you didn't move. That's not weakness. That's iron. Machiavelli watched Caesar Borgia do this masterfully. Borgia was one of the most feared men in Italy, and part of what made him terrifying wasn't his cruelty, it was his stillness. He never seemed threatened, scrambled. When enemies challenged him, He didn't bark and lunge like a cornered dog. He got quiet, and that quiet was the most unsettling thing in the room. People feared what he might do precisely because he never told them what he was thinking. The second principle goes deeper, and it's the one most people get completely wrong. Machiavelli made a distinction that changed the way I think about conflict entirely. He separated injuries into two categories: injuries that should be punished and injuries that should be ignored. Okay? And knowing the difference, he said, is everything. Here's the trap most people fall into. They treat every act of disrespect as equally important. Someone makes a small, snide comment at work. They obsess over it for days, plot how to respond, maybe even confront the person. Meanwhile, a genuinely dangerous slight, someone quietly undermining their reputation with the people who matter, goes completely unaddressed because it's less visible, less emotionally charged. Machiavelli called this strategic blindness. You're spending your ammunition on the wrong targets. His rule was brutal in its clarity. Small slights should be absorbed or ignored entirely. Not because you're weak, but because responding to small things makes you look small. Every time you fire back at a petty comment, you're signaling that the comment landed. You're elevating the person who made it to the level of a worthy adversary. You're giving them status they don't deserve. But serious threats, attacks on your reputation, your position, your livelihood, your relationships, those cannot be left unanswered. And when they must be answered, Machiavelli said, they must be answered decisively, not halfway, not with a polite correction. He wrote that men should be either won over completely or eliminated as a threat entirely, because a man you wound but do not finish will one day find the strength to come back at you. This sounds extreme in modern language, but translated to everyday life. If someone is actively working against you, neutralizing them halfway, confronting them gently, giving a soft warning, hoping they'll get the message rarely works. It just makes them more careful. If something needs to be addressed, address it fully, clearly, and without apology. The third principle is the one that separates Machiavelli from every other thinker on power, and is the one that feels most counterintuitive. He believed that the most powerful response to disrespect is often no visible response at all, paired with quiet, deliberate action behind the scenes. He called this the patience of the lion. Lions don't chase every animal that enters their territory. They watch, they wait, they conserve their energy. And when they move with absolute precision. Machiavelli admired this quality in rulers who outlasted their enemies not through constant battle, but through strategic patience. They let time work for them. They didn't need to announce what they were going to do. They just did it when the moment was right. Think about what this looks like in real life. Someone publicly embarrasses you. The emotional response, the one that lives in your gut, wants immediate satisfaction. You want to defend yourself right now in front of the same audience. Machiavelli would say, that impulse is your enemy, because public defenses rarely land the way you imagine. They often look defensive by their very nature. You're standing there explaining yourself, and the act of explaining looks like guilt, like insecurity. Instead, you say almost nothing in the moment. You stay composed, maybe a single, calm, unbothered sentence, and then you go to work. You strengthen the relationships that matter. You quietly demonstrate your value through your actions. If you let the person who disrespected you reveal their own character over time, because people who disrespect others publicly almost always do it again, and eventually they do it to the wrong person. Meanwhile, you've been building, and one day, without any dramatic confrontation, the power dynamic has simply shifted. Not because you fought, but because you played a longer game. Machiavelli also had something important to say about the source of disrespect, because not all disrespect is the same, and treating it as if it is will constantly lead you astray. He identified 3 distinct types of people who disrespect you, and each requires a completely different approach. The first type is what he'd call the ignorant challenger. This is someone who disrespects you, not out of malice, but out of a genuine underestimation. They don't know your capabilities. They haven't seen what you can do. They're not enemies. They're simply uninformed. Machiavelli's advice here is not to react with anger, but with demonstration. Show them. Let your work, your results, your competence do the talking. Anger here is not only unnecessary, it's counterproductive. You don't punish someone for not knowing something. You show them. The second type is the status tester. Okay, this person disrespects you specifically to see how you'll react. Okay, they're probing for weakness. They want to know where you sit in the hierarchy, and they're using a small act of disrespect as a tool to find out. This is actually more common than most people realize. It happens in offices, in friendships, in new social environments. The correct move here is composure plus a single, clear, unhurried signal that you noticed. You don't explode. You don't ignore it entirely either, because complete non-response can read as submission. You simply acknowledge it in the calmest possible way, in a manner that makes it clear you are not someone who can be tested. The message isn't "I'm angry." The message is "I saw that, and it didn't work." The third type is the genuine enemy, someone who disrespects you as part of a larger pattern of opposition. They're not testing you. They're not ignorant. They're actively working against your interests, and the public disrespect is a declaration. Machiavelli's counsel here was the clearest of all. Do not underestimate this person. Do not over-emote, and do not move until you are ready to move decisively. Let them think their tactics are working if that serves you. Let them underestimate your response, and when the time is right, act with precision. There's one more thing Machiavelli understood that almost no one talks about. He believed that the way you handle disrespect is inseparable from the way you see yourself. Here's what he noticed. Genuinely powerful people are almost never the most reactive in a room. Not because they have no ego. Machiavelli wasn't naive. He knew these were men with enormous pride. But their self-image wasn't dependent on every person they encountered affirming it. They didn't need the person who disrespected them to take it back. They didn't need the room to see them win the exchange. They already knew who they were. And that internal certainty, that groundedness, is what made the composure possible. You cannot fake that kind of stillness. Okay? It has to come from somewhere real. The people who overreact to disrespect, who lose themselves the moment someone challenges them, are almost always people who, deep down, aren't entirely sure of their own value. The insult lands so hard because part of them wonders if it's true. And so the rage is really just defense. It's the ego scrambling to protect a self-image it doesn't fully trust. Machiavelli would say, the most important work you can do before you ever think about strategy or tactics is to build a foundation of self-knowledge, so solid that disrespect simply cannot shake it. Not because you become arrogant and dismissive, but because you become certain. And certainty, in a world full of people performing confidence, is the rarest and most magnetic quality a human being can possess. So let's bring this all together. When someone disrespects you, the Machiavellian approach is not the emotional explosion, and it's not the silent suffering. It's a four-step internal process that happens before you say or do anything. First, you breathe. You hold the moment. Do not let your nervous system make the decision for you. Second, you assess. Is this small or significant? Is this an ignorant challenger, a status tester, or a genuine enemy? The category determines the response. Third, you control the visible signal. Your face, your body, your voice. Composure is not passivity. This power made visible. And fourth, you decide your move on your timeline, not theirs. Maybe that move is silence. Maybe it's a single, quiet sentence. Maybe it's a long game action that plays out weeks from now. But it comes from you, from a place of choice, not reaction. That is how Machiavelli's rulers held their courts. That is how the most effective people in business, in politics, in life have handled the inevitable moments when someone decides to test them, not with noise, with clarity, not with fire, with precision. 500 years later, nothing has changed. The courts are different, the weapons are different, but human nature, the hunger for status, the testing of limits, the search for weakness in others is exactly the same, okay? And the people who understand that, who prepare for it, okay, who respond to it with intelligence rather than instinct, are still the ones who end up holding the power, okay? If this video gave you something to think about, do me a quick favor. Hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I put a lot of work into these scripts and these ideas, and every like genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are into this kind of content. I've got a lot more coming, deep dives into Machiavelli, Sun Tzu, Robert Greene, Stoic philosophy, key, the psychology of influence, all of it grounded, practical, key, and built for people who want to understand how power actually works. See you in the next one.